Welcome to The Gamble and the Glory, where we hear founders tell the story of growing their companies to become industry leaders within the sports betting, fantasy, and iGaming industry. The Gamble and the Glory is presented by Segev LLP, a full solutions law firm purpose-built for the gaming and betting industry. With decades of experience and a truly global reach, Segev LLP is your go-to expert for legal solutions for all challenges commonly faced by companies from every industry vertical, including payments, blockchain, esports, affiliates, data, and more. If you need help with private equity funding, public markets financing, licensing, intellectual property, mergers and acquisitions, commercial deals, or other business needs, this is your team and it's what they do. Whether you're just getting started or have already scaled to become a stalwart of the industry, discover how Segev LLP can add value to your business and help you achieve your goals. Learn more at www.segev.ca. All right, we are back on The Gamble and the Glory, where we talk to founders in the real money gaming industry that have scaled their companies to become industry leaders. And my guests for this episode are about as big as it gets within the category of fantasy sports. I have Jay and Dylan here from PrizePicks coming at us from Atlanta. Guys, I saw you a couple months ago in May in New Jersey at the SBC conference. So great to have you here following that. Just to check in at the starting line, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having us, Jesse.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you joining. I know we're down to crunch time here for all builders in the space. We're about a month out from the start of NFL. So, we do appreciate you guys carving out a little bit of time to chat with us today. I caught up with both of you guys a few months ago at the SPC conference in New Jersey and New York. And Jay, specifically, you were at an event that was hosted by GeoComply. And shout out to GeoComply for hosting the Challenger Series. Just a quick plug for that event. If any founders in the industry have the opportunity to attend the Challenger Series, it's a fantastic room to be in with amazing entrepreneurs like Jay that are in there telling anecdotes and stories from their journey. And Jay, you shared some anecdotes that day in that room that I hope we can get into today. And for me personally, I hadn't heard a lot about the PrizePicks origin story. So why don't we just start there today, guys? It'd be awesome if we could spend a few minutes up front hearing from each of you and get in the DeLorean, go back in the time machine, hear a little bit about, I guess, the founding story of PrizePicks. How did you guys come together at the beginning? How did you go from 0 to 1? Just talk a bit about, I guess, going from, the original idea, the original concept to, the seeds of where you are today.
Yeah, maybe I can kick it off, Dylan, and hand it over to you. Told the story a couple of times, Jesse, like you mentioned, but my co-founder, Adam Wexler, the third member you were mentioning, he had been in the fantasy industry for a few years. Up until 2017 is when we kind of got this manifestation of PrizePicks off the ground. And, I think his mission was pretty simple. I think he had spent a couple of years in the industry trying to productize and figure out how do you create a product for the season-long fantasy player that's just simple and easy to kind of boil down that same feeling of action to a daily basis without having to spend the time and the research to do that on, day in and day out. And so I think after experimenting with a couple of different iterations of products, Adam eventually kind of landed on the concept of what is PrizePicks today in the version of a single player fantasy game. And, we had known each other through kind of previous work experience and teamed up to kind of get something off the ground. And like I mentioned, late 2017. I think the thesis and the premise was very simple, which is, can we build a daily fantasy sports game that is very simple, fast, and fun for the casual fan to get in and get out and just have that much more riding on tonight's game and make it that much more electrifying. And, we got to work quickly, built an MVP, sent it out to friends and family, and immediately saw, there was something there. I think the next kind of couple of months was figuring out how to legitimize the product, get payment processing, get our approvals, get the app stores, et cetera. And obviously, Dylan came on and had a huge hand in a lot of that. So, Dylan, maybe I'll hand it over to you to kind of cover that part.
Yeah, it's great story there, Jay. So I joined in March of 2018. Jay, you were what, 2017 fall?
Yep.
So Adam and Jay ran it for the first 4 to 5 months. I joined, ran into Adam, had a huge interest in the industry and in fantasy sports, and had been playing DraftKings FanDuel for a long time. At the time, Adam and I think one of our other early guys, James, was doing all the projections for the contest themselves. And I had an expertise in that, so I hopped on board early on solely to help out with the projections. And then over time, I think over the next 3 to 4 months, we grew. I think my first day we had 10 members play on the app. Like, it was still very, very small. And every single time an entry went through our Slack, it'd be like, oh my God, we had an entry. It would happen like once an hour. It'd be really cool for us to see that $5 entry get placed on something. And then we just worked and built out the product until we eventually launched in the fall of 2018.
I just want to stick with that timeline for a minute here, right? You talk about like 2017. Obviously, that was prior to PASPA's repeal. So at least at that time, really was like DFS. It was really sort of the only game in town, so to speak. And at that time, like, as you mentioned, Dylan, like it was really FanDuel and DraftKings that dominated the space. Like, how did you guys think about the fact that you were entering this category with two absolute juggernauts owning, probably most of the market share at that time? And what gave you, I guess, the confidence to think you could come in and carve out a piece of that market share and really, establish yourself as a differentiated offering and really take some of that market share from those incumbents?
I think looking back on it, it definitely seems like an impossible task, obviously, Jesse, I think is what you're getting at. And like, we felt that, I think, on the fundraising trail in the first couple of years, honestly, when you talk about wanting to build a BDC brand with the incumbents and kind of the variables you just mentioned in a highly competitive space with well-capitalized incumbents, like we heard no 1,000 times, right? Like that's not going to happen. You guys aren't going to be able to scale this. Where's all the money going to come from? Customer acquisition is going to be extremely expensive. So I think there were a lot of reasons looking back on it to say it seemed like a bit of a crazy, venture to take on. I think the things that gave me confidence, at least personally, I can speak to those, is from early on, and this is kudos to Adam and Dylan, obviously, as well, is just like we had a very relentless focus on rethinking the experience of what daily fantasy could be and the experience could be. I think the entire industry, with the culmination of PASPA obviously getting repealed in early 2018, Jesse, was very focused on sports betting at the time and what's coming down sports betting and what states are going to follow New Jersey, et cetera. I think people kind of forgot DFS or wrote it off, and we were playing in a space that was largely just was kind of overlooked, and we were really rethinking that. So that excited us. And I think people were kind of hungry for that in the marketplace from a user or member standpoint to say, like, we want something fresh and simple and easy and fun that, we can play in a majority of the country where daily fantasy was able to operate at that time. It still is. And so I think those are a couple of the factors that really got us excited about trying to, take on a big challenge.
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, it took me a little while to get that confidence that this was going to be what it was today. Honestly, I would have never believed it if you would have told me that back then. I mean, honestly, Adam did. I remember, Jay, the first time I met Adam at ATV at Atlanta Tech Village in Atlanta, which is one of the major startup hubs in Atlanta. The first thing that he said in the first hour that I met with him was, "This is a rocket ship, hop on board full time." And I wasn't fully a believer. I was like, you've got 8 customers. Like, how is that possible? Adam was always just like, this is going to work. I'm 100% confident. And he was right. But I talked to Jay as well, and I think was a bit more level-headed with the expectations and hopped on board to a growth path that made a lot of sense. And over time, it turned into what Adam had always believed it would become.
Awesome. Well, let's pick up, I guess, from the time you guys launched in 2018. I mean, you sort of got the band together, you got the concept together. Obviously, things were happening in the market, again, with the repeal of PASPA around that time. And to your point, Jay, you're right. Like, I reflect on that period of time, particularly with like DraftKings and FanDuel being those incumbents, very quickly turned their focus and attention to real money betting, which perhaps created a bit of space for you guys to come in and really make the splash that you did. I'm curious to have you guys reflect on, I guess, the journey to product market fit, right? This elusive journey all entrepreneurs go on to try and like validate that whatever it is they've come up with is going to have traction in the market. What was that journey to PMF like for you guys? And second part of that question is like, how did you know you found it? At what point were you like, okay, like we've gone from the 8 members or those individual pings in Slack and getting, like, when did you realize you had kind of sort of found something and you guys really were onto something big? And I guess, validating Adam's original enthusiasm that this was a rocket ship about to take off.
I look really fondly on those times because I think it was a lot of us just, I mean, me and Dylan honestly sitting shoulder by shoulder in the office, like he would come up with an idea, I would hack it together, we'd launch it. At that time it was a lot faster and a lot more cowboy style, but that's what got us to product market fit. I mean, it was like Dylan had a mastery over the customer psychology, the numbers, what we needed to do to drive certain goals and metrics. And I think he was relentlessly focused on that. And he drove a lot of the culture to become that. I think back then we were nimble enough, between me and a couple of other ICs in the early days, just to kind of move quickly on those hunches and trust that, we have people internally that had been in this industry and been on the other side of the fence as players for a long time and really understood what they wanted in a product. So that was a big benefit and advantage for us. A large majority of, I think, 2018, 2019 was just that, was like moving as fast as possible and iterating on the product. And it was awesome to see some of the stuff that ultimately I came out of that room and came out of Dylan's head and we got it into the product is now table stakes in the industry. And a lot of people have basically come in and copied a lot of those things. So it feels a little bit surreal from that perspective. I think to answer your second question, like it was a good year of that back and forth and just like very quick development and partnering with people like Dylan, other people in the business that had those hunches early on. And I think in January of 2019, Dylan, if I'm right, we signed must have been our first affiliate deal with like a B-list, C-list YouTube kind of affiliate, like a DFS influencer. And they posted their first video on, their daily prize picks. And I remember like the Dylan's mentioned, we had a Slack of kind of deposits or lineups being placed or contests being placed. And I remember that video got posted and it just started kind of ringing back to back to back to back. And like, that's the moment it definitely clicked for me to see, so cool. Here's distribution, here's the product, here's the automation. And there's like something real that we can scale from this point on. So I remember that point very clearly to say, okay, like we may be onto something here in terms of product market fit. Now it's just a matter of scale. But yeah, those are the best times for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. That's the exact moment that I went to so that was Locks DFS. I don't think they exist anymore, but it was a YouTube channel. 3 guys running it, Taylor, Adi, and Christian. We actually eventually brought Christian onto our team. He's working with us now. But yeah, it must have been 2019. We've been trying Facebook advertising, all these different things, and it worked, but it's expensive, it's hard to do, and found out a pretty easy way to draft off of the success of the industry as a whole and found a pretty, I would say, medium or small-sized YouTube channel. And that first video launched, like Jay said, I think it was like 100 people, but like even that was like, that was product market fit to us at the time. It was like we had 50 actives a day, and then all of a sudden we had 200, and I was like, oh my God, this is really cool. So yeah, I think that's the moment that I was like, this is real. And like the users of DFS that I grew up playing and knew well, they saw this as valuable and potentially a way easier way to get the same experience and sweat that they were getting from DFS with us.
Cool. And I guess since then, I mean, it's really been escape velocity, I think, is probably the story of PrizePicks since you guys found that product market fit. And just to contextualize this a little bit, I think a couple of months ago, you guys put out some PR announcing an investment in a new 33,000 square foot headquarters in Atlanta and committing to 1,000 new roles over the coming years. So that really sort of tells a story about some insane growth that's happening there. And I'm curious for you guys and Jay, like, you lamenting back to those early days where it was scrappy, you guys are sitting shoulder to shoulder, simpler times, I guess, in many ways. Obviously, when you have this type of growth that you guys have experienced with PrizePicks, things change rapidly within the organization. I'm curious for you guys as 2 of the 3 leaders of the business, in addition to your executive team, how have you guys sort of managed this scale of growth internally? And then specifically, I'm curious, like how you've thought about scaling and evolving company culture. Like what's changed along the way? What's remained the same? And sort of how you guys sort of thought about approaching this and managing all of that in conjunction and in parallel with the insane growth of the actual business?
Yeah, it's a tough question. What comes to mind immediately is like, I think we have been very intentional about giving those same people that had kind of the hunches early on, the power and the ownership to continue to make those decisions internally. I think Dylan's been very intentional about that in the organization and kind of design of his org underneath him. We've done the same thing on the technology side, and obviously Dylan and I are tied at the hip, so there's good communication between what you would call like the marketing, game operations, and revenue side of the house, and then just product engineering, analytics, everything that happens from a technical perspective. So I think my point being, like, I think we've got people internally that I think have lived in the industry, have lived on the other side of the fence as players of these products that have very strong understandings of the demographics and psychographics and what our customers want, what our members want. And we give those people a lot of, I think, ownership and power to make those decisions internally. So I think that's a strong part of the culture, which is let's drive that accountability and ownership down the organization to the people that are closer to the data, closer to the day in, day out. And I think we see a lot of results out of that. So like that's what immediately comes to mind when you ask that question, Jesse.
Yeah, I think the culture's changed a little bit. There's more process, there's more operations. I think that's natural and had to be a thing. Like back in the early days, like you said, Jay, it'd be like, have the idea for flex play, I'd tap you on the shoulder and be like, we need to build this, and you'd be like, you'd have it out in 2 weeks, and it would be the first time this is in the industry. We had no idea if it's gonna work or not. We just had thesis that it would help retention. We actually had multiple different iterations of flex play before the actual flex play came out and stuck. Back in the early days, we forced everyone into flex plays. That didn't quite work out the way we expected, and I think V2 was a little better. But that was the early days, and I think now we still have a lot of that same vibe and culture of like lots of big ideas running around, lots of stuff on the horizon for this football season that I'm excited about. But a lot of it comes from a core group of people that really get the customer, and it comes from that call at midnight where I'll call Jay and be like, we have this idea, or Grant will call me or you or whoever and push forward certain ideas. It seems like that's where a lot of the innovation is still coming from. But what's been really good about the culture is we have a lot of people that just really care about the industry and about the customer and fantasy. So everyone's excited about what they're building, what they're working on all the time.
Cool. I want to stick with the topic of innovation for a second here. And I mean, look, PrizePicks, as I mentioned at the outset here, is clearly the category leader within daily fantasy sports. Every week I have founders within the space on my podcast that are starting up new companies, many of which are trying to bring new spins on the fantasy model to market in their own unique way. And I guess I'm curious from your guys' perspective as the category leader, like, what are your broad reflections on the state of the DFS landscape in general right now, both from the end consumer perspective, but also from a competitive perspective, right? Like, you got all these people coming in trying to, I guess maybe what you saw as the incumbents in 2017 in FanDuel and DraftKings, many people now look to PrizePicks as that same thing. And we got people coming with their new ideas and innovations and spins. So I guess how are you guys, sort of thinking about it from the consumer perspective, from a competitive perspective, and really ensuring that PrizePicks will remain a category leader for years to come?
It is a lot more competitive than it was even last year and way more than the year before. I mean, there was really just us for a little bit. There were some early companies that flamed out, and then Underdog came in, and since Underdog, there's been 3 or 4 other ones that came in and taken real market share. So everything's getting harder for us. There's more competition on marketing, more competition on product, and I think it's really good for the customer. I mean, they're pushing us. We're always looking around at the competition to see what's getting built and making sure that we're always a step ahead and providing the absolute best experience for the customer that we can. So I think right now is the golden age of the customer. There's lots of fight and push to get market share right now, and all that's just going to be good stuff for the customers.
Yeah, I'd agree overall. I think like overall industry or the market's become a lot more saturated, a lot more options for, the end user. And so to Dylan's point, I think like we're really taking a look internally at our roadmap and just where we're headed in 25 and trying to figure out like what matters most to us and how we kind of stay ahead of the competition here. I think highly competitive, highly commoditized space, Jesse, as you know. And so I think we're very intentional, and that's led by a lot of a small group internally, like Dylan mentioned, about how do we stay a year, 2 years, or 5 years ahead of kind of the competition. But ultimately, I think the end user is going to be the biggest beneficiary.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, certainly from the outside looking in, it really appears as though you guys continue to innovate. You're pushing new products. So one thing I want to spend a couple of minutes focusing on here is esports. And Adam was on a podcast a couple of months ago, I think, on the Joe Pomp podcast, and alluded to the fact that for PrizePicks, CSGO, Counter-Strike, is the 4th largest sport for PrizePicks, which might not be so obvious on the surface to people, but I think it really speaks to the passion and audience with esports. I'm curious to hear from you guys, like, what do you see as esports representing as it relates to, I guess, the future of PrizePicks? You've made a big investment in the esports lab. Maybe you can talk about that briefly, but just talk generally about like the popularity of esports amongst your users and your customers. And, maybe for some of the esports and neophytes that might be listening in the audience here, maybe just quickly speak to what you see as the main similarities and differences between esports and the more sort of traditional big 4 sports in the US.
Yeah, I think esports has been a huge thing for us, obviously. And what's been really interesting is it's a lot of the same members that are playing NFL and NBA and MLB are the same ones playing esports. It's not necessarily different customers. I think that's kind of the assumption is, how do you go out and acquire esports customers? They're that different than NFL. I think we are doing a really good job of building our brand and our product for the next generation of customers. And that's really what we've latched onto. And a lot of those people grew up playing Call of Duty, playing Madden, playing 2K. So they understand how esports work. So it's not really as big of a jump as it may seem to most. So we've really seen great cross-sell, still acquiring most of our players in NFL and NBA, but we've seen an awesome amount of users start to play esports. So that was the investment in the esports lab, was how can we make esports, which is starting to become more and more popular, to the customers that don't fully understand that ecosystem and in-game environment, how can we teach them and have a place to easily look at stats and scores to understand that? So that was all investment in the esports lab.
Interesting. Anything you want to add there, Jay?
I remember that's another one of those, like, Dylan has a very interesting thesis with obviously our director of esports, Adam Booth. He's been a big piece of that, but Dylan called me like a year ago, I think, or a little bit over a year ago, and was like, why don't we try building that one-stop shop for, the customer so that it's readily available to go watch streams. The data's right there. There's some education for people that want to dabble or have started dabbling in esports, fantasy. And so what we thought initially would take us a little bit shorter, it took us the better part of a year to build, but we were really excited to at least get it out, soft launch it. Now we're iterating very quickly on that product, and we're getting some great feedback from people that are using it. But our biggest learning was, how fragmented the data provider market is in esports, and that's probably a big reason for why this sort of thing hasn't been done before. So definitely not a simple technical problem to solve, but it's been a fun one.
I would give more of that credit to Boothie. He had that idea for 2 or 3 years, pitching me on it day in, day out, and I was looking at some metrics one day, and I was like, okay, I'll let Boothie push this one forward, and I pushed it forward, and had that get built.
Do you guys see, with CSGO being, one of many esports titles, do you guys see the same potential upside with other esports titles, or is this really CSGO that's most conducive to the fantasy model?
No, it's everything. There's other ones that are right up there with CSGO. It's not specific at all.
I want to talk as well, just broadly about what you guys have done insofar as building a mass market consumer brand and product. I mean, in any category, in any industry, it's extremely difficult and frankly rare for B2C companies to really break through and penetrate into mainstream adoption in the way PrizePicks has. So curious to get your reflections on this and maybe, what you see as being the secret to PrizePicks' success in becoming a mass market brand, and if there's any particular sort of marketing and or product-led growth tactics that have really sort of helped you break through to that mainstream and really help you cement your position as leader of the category.
Yeah, there's one quote that one of our partners, Booker with Trent, he said on some podcast that has stuck with me for the last 3 years that I have just absolutely loved and repeated probably 100 times to the product team and to the marketing team. And that and I guess especially to the social media team, but if it's not something that you would post in the group chat with your friends, don't post it. So like our social media team, at least in the early days, I think there's a little bit more process today to how they do that. But in the early days, that was kind of the lens that we were always thinking about all of our tweets and Instagrams was, is this going to be notable enough or funny enough where your friend's going to put that in the group chat with 20 other guys and it's going to go viral? That was the thought, and like that really worked well. I would honestly recommend that to other founders. Like that's a great lens to think through of getting that kind of like growth hack viral out of organic stuff. So I think that's how we thought about a lot of marketing. Obviously a lot more in depth in our marketing plan and mix, but that was kind of the high level organic strategy. And then Jay, I'll let you on product.
Yeah, I think obviously trying to lean into the same strategy on the product side. Dylan's been very intentional there as well. As like, what can we always do to make sure that a user feels like this is worth sharing, or if they're posting it on Twitter or on social somewhere, like somebody else is gonna hopefully convert from that or ask, hey, what's going on here? Like they've always taken that lens, and especially Dylan and his group have really taken that lens and push that feedback on the product side to say like, let's do things that are going to go viral, do things that people are going to want to feel that are worthy of sharing on social or with their friends and whatnot. So I think that's definitely helped a lot. And then I think like from my vantage point, I'm obviously not on the marketing side as much as Dylan is, but definitely am a consumer of a lot of the partners and the content that we've partnered with over the last couple of years. And I think like I can speak firsthand from that perspective to why I think it's worked. This is a brand that's built by people that actually live, breathe, and die that content and live in this world. And us being from Atlanta is definitely a big part of our brand as well, with the intersection of sports, culture, hip hop, and everything that comes out of this city. And so like being headquartered out of here, and Jesse, you kind of alluded to the big build out we're doing, towards the end of this year, like that's all very intentional. And I think Dylan and his group have done a awesome job of making sure that seeps through the brand to the end user. And I think that's why we're experiencing a lot of the success that we are, because frankly, I don't see any of the other real incumbents or operators in the industry taking that lens, because it's authentic for us. And I'm just not sure it is for some of the other groups. So I think that really works.
Awesome. Just as a bit of an extension to that, I know PrizePicks has a number of partnerships, both with different arenas and teams. And I'm just curious if you can talk briefly about like a partnership strategy and sort of what that's done for you insofar as, again, just sort of elevating the brand and the visibility of it and driving the awareness of PrizePicks. Because I have to assume, some of these partnerships are significant investments, they're not cheap. And I'm just curious sort of how that's moved the needle for you guys to really, again, elevate the brand above a lot of the noise that's out there when it comes to consumer choice within the category.
Yeah, I think more of the team and like bigger ones are, I would say, those are trust. Is like you partner with a team. It's a really good way to foster trust in an organization, which is honestly the most important thing for any operator. Is you want to make sure that people trust that their funds are safe, that the games are fair, that the things are going to be settled correctly. All those things are really, really important, kind of the foundation. So I think adding some more structure to large teams and things like that's great. What I'm really excited about has been the way that we've done influencers and content. I think we've done that better than anyone else, partnering with people like Book It, Nelk Boys, Sugar Sean, Drewski. I can name hundreds of these. I'm probably missing a bunch, but that has really been where PrizePicks has leaned in, and I think created a culture of being the brand that is kind of at the same level, speaking your language as the consumer. A lot of the other brands, I think, look a lot more corporate, is the word I would describe, and aren't doing these deals that might be a little bit more risky in terms of CAC, but they're going to really pay off in terms of brand. And I think what's been great is these partners also can build with us, and they have ideas, they have content ideas. We had a hot dog contest. I don't know if you saw that probably a month ago, where we had all of our influencers do a hot dog eating contest, and that was something that we built right alongside one of our partners, which is really, really cool. So I think partners has been a really, really great way that we've grown organically.
Awesome. I want to spend a minute as well just talking about DFS as a category from a regulatory perspective. And look, I mean, it's no secret. There's been a lot of public discourse over the last year in particular, some states taking a bit of a closer look at the model. And I know Adam's spoken quite publicly about this, so we don't need to repeat all of that. But I am just sort of curious, I guess, sort of since that, a lot of that public discourse sort of culminated last fall. How have you guys, I guess, just been thinking about that insofar as adapting, I guess, or future-proofing the business to insulate yourself from any, external pressures that may come from any regulatory change in the future? And just sort of how you guys thinking about that here in August 2024?
Honestly, it feels like everything's moving in the right direction. Had a couple of scares last fall, but we keep getting more and more yeses on the core PrizePicks game across a lot of states that have really started to solidify the overall game. And there are a couple of states where they have had the opinion that the games have to be peer-to-peer to be a fantasy game, and we've created this new product called Arena that's worked really well in the States and has been really popular amongst users over the first, I think, 6 months that we've had it launched. So feeling really good about that, honestly.
I want to shift gears here for the remainder of our time and focus a lot more on, I guess, your guys' just, entrepreneurial journeys and maybe a bit of experience sharing with the journey thus far. And I want to start with a bit of a conversation around just capital raising. You alluded to this at the outset, Jay, but back at the GeoComply event I mentioned in May in New York City, you told a bit of a story there around the PrizePicks fundraising journey. And, as you mentioned, you guys have raised somewhere around like $10 million in total, which frankly, for the size and stature of the business is a hilariously small amount to get to the scale that you've reached, particularly when compared to the capital and the balance sheets of some of the competitors, FanDuel, DraftKings, and the like. So I guess, just to tee this one up, it'd be awesome to have you guys just sort of tell the audience a bit about the fundraising journey that you guys have gone through and sort of just how you thought about capital as a means to grow the business versus growing organically, which sounds like certainly since the initial capital you've raised has been the path that you've chosen. So I'll tee one up for you, maybe Jay, to kick us off.
Yeah, I'll kind of reiterate the same thing I mentioned maybe in May at the event, which was like, obviously in the early days when, like Dylan mentioned, we were serving a very small amount of customers and it was more so a dream than there was hard data to back it. That's what we were selling. And so, that's definitely primarily credit to Adam and the relationships that he had built, and obviously the investors that he had brought in early on through the earlier iterations of products that he had been working on in the fantasy industry. We were fortunate to have the support of a lot of the cap table and some of his network in those early days to just be able to get this thing off the ground, and bring in people like Dylan, obviously, and some of the other early employees after him, just to get this to the point where we were able to launch in the fall of 2018 and get into the App Store and, have contractors to be able to hire and things of that nature. I think a lot of the trepidation around, trying to build a B2C brand in an industry like this forced us to just be very intentional about costs and how we scaled a business in the early days. So, we got very creative, I think, and it forced I think, Dylan, you can speak more to this, like our marketing and revenue side of the house to become very intentional about how we deploy money and how we invest the limited funds that we did to just be able to compound growth. I think that's paid massive dividends beyond just obviously the growth that it produced, but just the mindset of the organization and, how we still operate to this day, I think is very similar to how we used to. And, I think the other thing is that, that expertise over the numbers in the early days and just as we grew, it really enabled us to get creative with how we finance the business. So I mentioned this at the GeoComply event as well, but like being able to get creative about going out and finding debt sources here and there to fund our customer acquisition because we had the confidence in our unit economics. That's kind of definitely been a contributor to the growth. And overall, we've been just very intentional about how we've continued to invest and compound the growth over the past couple of years. But Dylan, I don't know if you want to go into more detail.
I think my favorite story, it's a little bit tangential, was COVID. Most people probably don't know that they probably hadn't heard of PrizePicks till after COVID, but we started 3 years before COVID hit. We had very little money in the bank, and we're grinding to make ends meet. I think things were looking up. We were hiring. We were making some headwinds on acquisitions, on retention. It was all looking pretty good, but then all of our revenue, like I said, went away. And I think at that point, like, we were somewhat contemplating closing up shop. It was like, are we going to make it past this? I'd say, Jay, the one person was Adam that was like blindly optimistic, saying, oh no, we will easily fundraise money and figure this out. I honestly wasn't as sure as that. I was very nervous about it. I think you were in the middle somewhere there, but Adam ended up pulling it off, raising, I think, $500,000, which is what ended up getting us through COVID. And then we got really, really creative during COVID in terms of putting up markets for fantasy contests. We did cornhole. That was our first foray into esports, where I like scoured like the DFS Twitter sphere to find people that knew esports. At the time, a lot of what we did was manual, so like I was doing all the esports projections. We would have, like, it was working, but it wasn't going to work long term. So I found a guy, Adam Booth, who I mentioned earlier, that was hired to work on our esports projections back in COVID, and that plus cornhole plus KBO plus we sponsored an Outlaw Tour event. I don't know if y'all remember the Outlaw Tour from COVID era, but all sorts of random things of that, plus the $500K that Adam managed to raise got us through COVID.
And just to stick there for a second, Dylan, I mean, Jay alluded to being very intentional about how you guys deploy your resources and the investments you make. I'm just curious if you talk a little bit about that. Because I get a lot of founders on my podcast that raise maybe $500K, $750, maybe $1 million. And I always ask them, like, well, how are you going to invest these funds? What are the next milestones for your business with this capital? And it's clear to me not everybody like really thinks super intentionally about the answer to that question. I'm just curious, like, if you can elaborate on how you think about it. Like, what's your sort of framework for evaluating how you make investments, where you're allocating capital, how you measure returns or potential for returns? Just, give us a little bit of more meat on the bone there, if you would.
I think that process has definitely changed. I think in the early days, it was me or Adam or you, Jay, just having an idea and like just discussing and be like, oh, let's do this, let's do that, fighting over which one we go first. Now we've got a process. We've got anything in the product is run through a full prioritization, stuff like that. We have lots of other growth opportunities that are large that we're always evaluating and looking at. So I just say it's always lots of ideas and paths, and I just think over time it's gotten a little bit more process and proper prioritization.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about your guys', I guess, personal journeys since you joined this rocket ship. Obviously, every day is different. You're on a roller coaster. Early days are just fighting to survive. Now you're figuring out how to scale this thing. In parallel to all this, though, like, you guys are developing serious entrepreneurial scar tissue. And I'm curious, like, from a personal development perspective, like, how, I guess, have you guys grown yourselves as leaders, as entrepreneurs in parallel to growing the business? Like, what is it you guys are doing to sort of grow individually in parallel to the rapid growth of the business?
I can take a stab at that. I think what comes to mind immediately for me is I'm very fortunate that I work with reports and people in my division that are much more experienced than myself and just have a lot more reps than myself. And so I'm fortunate I'm able to really lean on their expertise and basically know what my role is. I've obviously been in the industry as long as Dylan has now, with our experience in PrizePicks. And so, like, subject matter expertise and just understanding where the overall strategy and vision that we need to drive to, playing that traffic controller route, but really trusting my reports, my teammates within the technology division to execute on their expertise. Like, I'm very fortunate to be able to learn, I think, is essentially what I'm getting at, Jesse, from like the team members that I have, right? They've all got their unique experiences in different industries, et cetera. And so bringing that to the table has been awesome. Obviously, there's stuff that I think a lot of executives and founders do that's just table stakes, like peer groups, executive coaches. That's stuff that I think is a lot more top of mind for me in particular as we've grown to the size that we have and we've hired as much as we have on the tech side in the last 12 months, 18 months, is like when we take our org from 50 to 100 to 250 to 500, hopefully in the future. How do I put myself personally in the best position to manage if that is my role? So I think those are a couple of things that are tangible that come to mind. And I think, obviously just working very closely with our executive team and the leadership at our company, we all know we kind of cover different aspects of the business. So I think we've got a very good culture top down that, generally allows us to be able to support each other and kind of stay focused on where I need to stay focused, support Dylan where he needs it, et cetera. And that goes both ways.
Yeah, I'd say I agree with Jay. I think the coolest thing about this is you just get to learn so much. When I first signed on to PrizePicks, I remember really valuing it. I was like, this will be a great chance to learn versus like, oh, I'm making $10 an hour, like, and have some equity that is probably worth zero. Like, cool. But it was like, I can like learn how a company works. Like, that was my first thought. Thought that was awesome. But that's like really held true today is like, as we go from point to point, from point 0 to point 1 to point 100 or wherever we're at now, there's just like new things to learn. And every single day we're partnering with just like really bright people solving really hard problems. Like this week alone, Jay, we had an on-site in Atlanta. We flew in 50 people working on a specific really, really hard problem that me, Jay, and Grant, and a few others kind of ideated on solving 2 or 3 years ago. Honestly, didn't even know if it was solvable by a team like us, and like to see it, like we're going to have in product in the fall, hopefully. It's really cool. And just to see 60 really bright people working on it and learning and just asking questions, like it's the coolest thing ever. I think that's one thing that I really agree with Jay is like hire people that are smarter than you at specific things. Like that's been what I've tried to do the whole way along. I'm sure Jay, same thing. It's like there are experts at all of these things. There's an expert at paid social. There's an expert at pricing things on projections. All these things have experts, and it's just been learning and just getting experts as we go and learning from all of them.
Awesome. And I want to talk as well about, I guess, relationship as a founding team between you guys as individuals. I really get from, the time we spent here together today so far that you guys have a high degree of trust in each other. But it's often said being a co-founder is often like being in a marriage, right? You got to take the good with the bad, and there's good days, bad days, whatever other sort of comparisons you want to make to marriage. But I guess, yeah, just it'd be great to hear from you guys. Like, how do you guys maintain, after all this time and all you've been through and the journey you've been on, how do you sort of maintain the tightness and, I guess, camaraderie and the chemistry and the effectiveness as co-founders as the businesses continue to grow?
I think it's a high level of trust. Like Adam has given that trust to me and Dylan for sure. He's let us, run autonomously and build, to the vision that he had originally set out. So that's number one. Like we wouldn't be here without him and the trust that he put in Dylan, myself, and the rest of the team. I think we're all very relentlessly focused on, and I keep using that word, but it's true. Like we're very focused on just the outcome and goals. And I think as long as we kind of align on what we're trying to do, which is, build the most exciting brand in fantasy and the best product in fantasy, I think we'll work out the small details as they pop up, as they do with all relationships. But like that's what I think has kept us going. And like me and Dylan still talk to each other, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whatever. He'll call me whenever we chat about ideas. Like we still have that same, I think, energy and excitement that we did on day one in 2017, 2018. And the same goes for Adam and a lot of the other early team. And I think that's been a big recipe for success. But yeah, ultimately, I think we just have fun at what we're doing. And I think that really shows.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it still doesn't feel like a job. I mean, we're working 60 hours a week plus. It's always been that. But it still feels like this was my dream growing up, was to work at a place like this and to be able to do that. And just every single day, like it still is just so much fun working so hard every day and grinding and seeing the success. So I think that's one. And I think trust is a good one you said there, Jay, but also like I feel like we are always just talking. Like I'm calling Jay at 10 p.m. I'm calling Ari, who's our CFO, almost every night. Call Grant almost every we're just always talking. This is kind of like our life. Like this is like one of the most important things and something that we're all like obviously ups and downs at times with certain relationships, but overall I feel like we're all just fighting for the same goal and feel that.
And this is a bit of a big question, but in building, again, what is now a category leading juggernaut, I assume it's had its challenges along the way. I'm just curious if you guys reflect on the whole journey so far. What are some of your top level, like key learnings, I guess, from inception to finding product market fit to this rapid growth you're now experiencing? What are some of the top level takeaways in terms of just key learnings for you guys that maybe you could dispense for other entrepreneurs that might be listening to this and, in the earlier days of their own journey, growing their own businesses?
I would say that number one that pops to mind is simplicity. I don't know if that's what you think of, Jay, but it's like every time we've ever had a debate over product or tests of something, the simpler version almost always wins. There's been a couple times where it hasn't been the case, but keeping it simple, not showing that extra tutorial, not like every single time we've wanted to add something or do something, it's the simpler version almost always wins. That's one very obvious one.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I think maybe more at like just a business level or strategy level, Jesse, like what comes to mind is just, again, being very like outcome or goal driven. I think this probably happens to a lot of companies. And like, even this week, a lot of the conversations Dylan and I had just reminded me of, in the early days, we were very intentional quarter by quarter where we wanted to be numbers wise. And I think that's been driven through our culture for the lifetime of the company. I think that's the way we still operate it today. Is like, where are we trying to be by July? Where are we trying to be by December? And then checking in on that. We've been very good about that. So I think my kind of just what comes to mind when you ask the question is being very outcome focused or goal driven and continuing to kind of push that through your culture. Because I think as a company grows, you can definitely become bloated and start running in circles and kind of lose sight of that. And like, we fell into those traps here and there a little bit, probably in within pockets of the organization, but it's nice to have that kind of fire under your ass every now and then, just to say like, what are we really trying to achieve by the end of the year or by the end of the half and try to get it done. So I think that's one thing we've been very good at.
Yeah, I have two other ones too. I just thought of, I think, really good. One is believing in things. Like, if you would have told me we would be where we are today when we started this, or even a year or two in, I would have like laughed. Like, there's just no way. To give Adam some insane credit, he always believed this. Like, never once doubted that this was the outcome. And I, at times, was like, just like didn't believe it. But really, really impressive that he had that foresight and optimism. I think optimism trumps skepticism in most cases. I truly believe in scenarios where the upside is uncapped and the downside is capped. I think that's really good opportunities for any bet on a startup or anything really. I think it's a really good thing. So that was one of them. And the other is something that I think I've done a really good job at that I would recommend is just reading. Like, I grew up in the industry playing DraftKings and FanDuel, but more than that, I read every single forum on Roto Grinders. I followed all the Twitter people, listened to every podcast in the industry, and was honestly like addicted to like following the news. I just loved the industry so much. I think that's what kind of gave me a leg up when starting here to like really ideate and come forward with a bunch of cool ideas. But that hasn't stopped, and I think most of the like really core people that are driving PrizePicks today are still that same thing. I know, Jay, I asked our IT team, I think like Tuesday, I was like, I know you'd always been number one in Slack messages sent. I think I just passed you this week. So I think I'm one, you're two, and PrizePicks Slack messages ever sent. So I think it's just like always being around. I read everything in Slack. I might not respond, but I read every single channel, every single deck. At night, I'm always reading and learning. I'm on Twitter, all the podcasts. I think just like learning and just kind of like ears on the ground to what's going on in the company and in the industry has really helped us drive creativity.
Love it. You guys have talked about, I guess, being goal-oriented and objectives-oriented. And I guess that segues nicely into another topic I want to touch upon, which is just, I guess, broader ambition and end game, so to speak. And look, I reasonably assume, PrizePicks has been financially successful enough to make its early team members, I don't want to say financially independent, but perhaps so. But at some point, like, it stops becoming like, quote unquote, about the money. And I guess if we accept that premise, I'm curious to hear from you guys, what motivates you guys to keep pushing when maybe you don't need to, right? You're both still young. You could be doing anything you want ostensibly. Like, what keeps you guys going? And I guess as a second part to that, thinking about the term success, like, how do you guys define success, and how do you know if you've reached it ultimately? So yeah, a bit of an open-ended one there. I'll tee it up for whoever wants to kick it off.
It's a good question. I think for me personally, the motivation of the driver is just trying to build the best product, best brand, best company in this industry, like Dylan was talking about. I think you're right. Like, it's not money motivated at this point. We're way bigger than I think both Dylan and I had at least could have imagined in the early days. I think Adam is a bit of a different story, but at this point, it's like we've become relentlessly focused on seeing like, how much further can we take this thing? Can we take it to number one? I think build the most exciting brand, build the most exciting product in the industry is kind of the mantra that's just spoken again and again inside the company right now. So I think that's it for me.
I would agree. I mean, I get asked this question all the time by friends, family, whoever, of like, when are y'all going to sell? When are y'all going to IPO? Like, whatever. It's like, that doesn't even cross our mind. Like, obviously, if something comes across the desk, we'll evaluate it. But we have so much confidence in this team and the innovative and creativity of the core team, and just so many ideas like that we have that we want to build that are going to get built over the next couple of years of just like, we want to be number one in everything, like number one. So really it's just shooting for the moon and making sure that we hit that. And I think the reason is like at this point, it's not about the money. It's my dream job. Jay, I'd say I would assume it's yours. It's like, I'm in no rush to have that payday or whatever. It's like, I care more about the days that we're having so much fun, that we're staying up till midnight working on something, that we're having this great idea and on a whiteboard, like figuring out how it's going to actually work in the product. Like that is just so fun. And I think about it all the time. It's like, I don't want to lose that. So I want to just keep building and building and building. And I think we have very high sights for the company.
Love it, guys. To finish up today, as I said, we're at the time of recording about a month out from the start of NFL. So yeah, I just wanted to get from you guys, I guess, looking ahead to the all-important NFL season, anything you can share in terms of what might be coming out from inside the building there, or on the product side, or anything, that has you particularly excited about the upcoming NFL season?
A lot. I mean, this is like peak excitement for me right now. Jay, probably same for you. Is like, this is just so exciting. We've got a lot coming out. We'll have an announcement out probably by the time this podcast launches, which would be really, really awesome. And we're all really excited about that. 3 or 4 really big product initiatives for football. I don't think we can get into the specifics of those, but some new things on PrizePicks, filmed a whole new suite of commercials and campaigns for the fall for marketing. So just really fun time of year, and excited to see it all come together in a month. It's just like waiting down the days to like see all this hard work come to fruition.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, we'll leave it there for today, but really appreciate the time you've spent with us here today. I know you got a lot of other things you could be spending your time on, so we do appreciate it, and appreciate you, sharing a lot of your anecdotes and experiences, because frankly, a lot of people look up to PrizePicks as a company and to you guys as the founding team. Clearly, you've built something very special, so really appreciate the time and wishing you guys all the best for the upcoming NFL season.
Thank you very much. It was awesome.
Thanks for having us, man.